Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Hey folks, and welcome back to the podcast. Today is a wonderful hybrid three-way episode. Pun always intended, giggity. Firstly, we have my good friend and returning guest, Steve Sadler. He is the founder of Rekindle. He's a firefighter, writer, researcher, and on-call evangelist, but mostly he's a father of two and a partner of one. And we have the pleasure of being joined by Josh Gaynor, who is the Director of Health Improvement and Influencing at the Firefighters Charity, because we're talking all about the Firefighters Charity. So what is that? The Firefighters Charity offers specialist lifelong support for members of the UK Fire and Rescue Services community, empowering individuals to live happier and healthier lives forever. So they're UK Fire Family Charity. They're here for every member of the extensive fire service community. They exist to help them all to live healthier and happier lives. And they do it by providing a broad range of health and wellbeing services online and in person. So this is not just for firefighters. They ensure that you and your loved ones can easily access empowering information, advice and support whenever you need it. They help you live healthier and happier lives, whether you're looking to make positive changes in your lifestyle or if you need support with recovery from injury and illness. I personally have been to the charity a couple of times when I tore my pec off on my chest. I've had a prolapse disc in my back and I snapped the right patella tendon on my knee. And I've also sought support from them with some psychological challenges with my mental fitness to do with addiction, some bouts of very low mood, and then also a marriage relationship breakdown that was probably one of the most recent elements where I reached out for their support, and they've been very good. So we'll put some links in this one. You can go on and look at their self-assessment tools. You can look at the physical health resources. They have a crisis line. There's stuff on there around social well-being, nursing, retirement, and also family support. Now, they've got some wonderful sites across the UK, Harkham House, Marine Corps and Jubilee House. They're 3 residential centres around the country, and they invite beneficiaries to join them to focus on their health and well-being. They do psychological health referrals on long-term chronic physical health injuries and issues, and you get invited to visit Harkham House in Devon. It's beautiful down there. And then people who have predominantly physical health needs will be invited to Marine Court, that's in West Sussex, or Jubilee House in Cumbria. And they've also got dedicated nursing teams there as well. So there's a lot to get into in today's conversation. Josh has a wealth of knowledge to bring to us from the Firefighters Charity, and Steve is always there to box it off and shore it up with some hard, provable data. And I'm just here for the bants. So I hope you enjoyed today's chat. Thanks for coming back. Be sure to jump into the notes, have a look at the Firefighters Charity. Make sure you download the app, stick it on your phone. If you're a member of our community or a family member of our community, which is the same thing, then make sure you're clicking that link in the notes. Hope you're well, love you, miss you. Let's get into today's episode. I'll see you on the other side. I did read it, yeah, the acknowledgement and the blowing smoke up.
Yeah, you didn't have to do that.
As well. Don't worry about it. I always say to people, it's incredible what you can achieve when you don't care who gets the credit. Do you know what I mean? And that's why it's not the Pete Wakefield show. The podcast has been successful and continues to be because of the guests. It's not really anything to do with me. I'm just the sort of conduit for the thing.
Don't be so self-deprecating and humble. That's not true.
Well, I'm either stupid enough, naive enough, or optimistic enough that I'm willing to come on and sound like a bit of a dick most of the time. Because the reason people don't do this stuff is they're too scared of getting it wrong. They're too scared of being embarrassed. Oh, what if I say retained instead of on call? Oh, will everyone sack me? No, nobody really cares. You know what I mean? People know what we mean. I get stuff wrong every episode, and people go, I know what he meant. You don't get a flood of emails saying you don't know anything. And all that sort of stuff, so don't worry about that. I have started swearing less when we actually record, so just for Josh's reassurance.
I didn't know whether the effing and jeffing,
is going to continue into it. No, so I always try and square that circle in my head. There's a balance between trying to build rapport and mirroring and paraphrasing and building rapport with the guests. So if we have general firefighters on with the greatest respect, it's a bit like having a builder in the house. Sometimes you recalibrate your language, but also it does just demonstrate poor vocabulary, your inability to articulate yourself very much. And I'm also want to be respectful of the guests. And I never want somebody to listen back to something and feel embarrassed or feel like, oh God, I wish I didn't have done that.
One challenge on that though, there's research out there that says if you can say 10 profanities related to a particular subject within 1 minute, more than 10, you're likely to have a better vocabulary than somebody that can't. So if you take somebody and say, right, let's say use a sexual profanity and say as many as you can, go. And actually, they've done research to suggest that the person that says more has a better vocabulary.
I'm quite interested. I've played little games where you have to think of as many 4-letter words beginning with S as an example. I like those sorts of games. Do you know what I mean? Like, you've got a minute. How many 4-letter words can you think of beginning with T? That's a nice little mental flex. And I said this to someone we had on yesterday. Don't underestimate the linguistic gymnastics and verbal masturbation, because actually that's quite nice for some people as well. They like to hear people talk and expand their language and all that sort of jazz. But anyway, we're going off down rabbit holes. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. Shall we go for it?
Let's
go for it. Yes.
Let's.
So,
Josh, when we're looking at the when we're looking at the UK demographic in terms of whole time and on call, I wanted to start by getting a bit of an understanding for how many people are really within the on call sector for firefighters in the UK.
I think some of the data is difficult to find. We know that there are approximately about 17,000 on-call firefighters across the UK. Wow. So it's quite significant, and obviously some areas are different to others in terms of the levels of on-call compared to whole time. But some of that data is difficult to unpick because, as we know, some are whole time and on call in different areas, and we don't necessarily have access to that data nationally about those that are true on call in terms of that's their sole relationship with the fire and rescue service, and those that have whole time plus on call positions elsewhere. But it's a significant
those
proportion.
Sort of dual contract aspects, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Given from a station demographic, so 17,000 being the rough number, what does that look like in terms of stations? Because what is the 47 services in the UK now, something like that?
Yeah, I think the data suggests that kind of over half of all stations in the UK are kind of supported by on-call, but that they can provide emergency cover to approximately 90% of the UK at kind of any time. So, operating a significant, in our communities where I am right now and you guys are right now, the likelihood is that on-call firefighters are supporting your communities.
Do you think it's a massive misunderstanding or assumption, Steve, when we look at on-call versus volunteer versus retained? And again, we've always got to pull ourselves out of our sort of insider conversation, because a lot of members of the public still think there's a lot of volunteer firefighting that goes on. We were speaking with John Hartley from Australia the other day. He runs the World Firefighter Games. And something ridiculous, like 70-80% of theirs are still fully volunteer. They don't get paid at all. And there's a value associated with their employers recognizing that these people get a great deal of professional development. They take that back into the workplace. But there's something about the UK that I think we struggle with on-call recruitment, don't we? I know it's been our conversation on a couple of times in the past. We really struggle with that. And I think the public's perception is that volunteer firefighters are all over the UK.
Yeah, and that's why it's great to have this conversation, to be able to talk about the on-call, raise awareness of the on-call and their predominance across the landmass, whilst also raising awareness for the Firefighters charity. Thank you for involving me in the FFC meets FFP conversation. I'm very grateful, and it's like a dream for me to talk about topics and maybe delve into a little bit of research and data as we're already doing to just sort of shine a light on some of the key issues.
It's always good to have you, brother, because I always say with somebody like Steve, you always bring receipts. So when I'm trying to pull ethereal things out of my brain and out of my intuition, you often have something legitimate to be able to back it up with. Otherwise, so much of it is just, I think this and I think that. And most of that is based on somewhere. So Josh, why are we struggling to reach on-call firefighters? Because I run, a lot of onboarding and selection processes and inductions. And I think it's the end of the first day. We always do an introduction to the Firefighters charity. We have the slides. We talk about the history of it. Obviously, I've done a lot of work supporting the charity in the past, but also I've benefited from it. I even just 18 months ago, I snapped my patella tendon off, and I went to Harkham House and got the support there. But a lot of on-call don't seem to have the awareness of it. And there's almost an aspect of we can't rest on our laurels. Like, give people an understanding of how long the charity's been around and the need to keep marketing it, if that makes a sense, because we're doing so much retirement now and recruitment. It's like a whole new workforce that we're speaking to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the charity's obviously been here for 80 plus years now. So an incredible amount of time where it's been consistently supported by the people it services and the people it tries to meet. And there's an incredible connection between the charity and our beneficiary base. We kind of refer to it as our fire family. But what we regularly experience, and this kind of cuts across both on call and whole time and the families, because we support dependents as well, is people feel that their need isn't great enough to reach out to us, that there's somebody else that needs us more than they do, or for on call, often it's that, oh, well, I'm not eligible because I'm only on call. And I think it's kind of raising people's awareness of the fact that you don't have to be experiencing the worst crisis of your life to reach out to us. We are here for you, and we want to be with you, kind of not just when those tough times are there, but when and supporting you to improve your well-being. So how do we keep you strong? How do we keep you resilient? How do we keep you doing the things that you love doing for longer? And also, because of the kind of increasing early retirements that people are going through now, people don't necessarily understand that they are a beneficiary for life with us. So you only have to have worked for the Fire and Rescue Service as on call or whole time or support staff or control for 5 years, and then you are a beneficiary for life. All of this is available to you for your life, which is an incredible offer. And I've worked in charities for 20 years, and never have I had the privilege of engaging in a charity that kind of has that level of offer to its beneficiary base.
I think there's a few really important points that you make there. One being, and I suppose it's kind of an accident in the naming of it, not that I would ever suggest we rename it, but we call it the Firefighters charity. Mm-hmm. And then we expand that out to everyone that belongs to the fire service. And I think there is, having spoken to a great number of Green Book staff who don't think it applies to them. Mm-hmm. Because when we've been doing charity cycle rides or marathons or car washes or stuff like that, some will get involved just because they're that sort of person. That's probably what attracts them to the sector, that sort of good moral compass and that willingness and desire to help and support other people. But sometimes it's been done with a sense of, I'm happy to be involved, but I know it's not necessarily something that I'll be able to benefit from. And I've sort of tilted my head back and gone, what are you on about? And they're like, well, I'm not a firefighter, which is fine. And I said, no, yeah, well, I get why you think that, but that's not the case at all. And again, I think that's just a communications piece, but I also don't know. And I've just sort of tripped into that hole myself when I said it there. It's like, I do all the inductions for firefighters. But when people get inducted into Green Book staff, backroom staff, control staff, admin, whatever it might be, HR, I wonder if they even get an introduction, Can you shine in a light on that, Joss? This episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity in the brand new MSA Connected Firefighter platform. Now back to the show.
So I think it varies dependent on kind of the fire and rescue service that you're in as to kind of how the charity is introduced to you dependent on your position within the organisation. I think there's that sharing that knowledge that you are a beneficiary of the charity, but also that knowledge of who we are and what we do. There's a lot of historical understanding of the charity around who we have been. And I think, in the last kind of 5 years, we've been trying to drive forward with a prevention agenda. So how can we support people to think about their well-being and build their health and their well-being at an earlier stage, so that actually, yes, we're always going to be here for those crises, for when you kind of hurt your Achilles or have a hip replacement, but how can we be there for you to, as you're an on-call firefighter, manage your work-life balance? How can we be there for you as you're struggling with your sleep and that's impacting on your well-being? So those kinds of things, that message is kind of equally as important, kind of for me goes hand in hand with you are a beneficiary and we're not just here for you when you're in that time of need as well.
I always think of it as a kind of good to great analogy, which is a really, really old book, which is one of my favorite books. Like, you wouldn't wait until you're in the water drowning to put the life vest on. Do you know what I mean? If you knew you're on the Titanic and you've seen the water rising, you've been told the ship's going down, you've seen what my current approach to life is not sustainable. At some point, I'm going to be in that water. You'd put it on before you got in. Like, I had some counselling earlier on last year, for some support in my own personal life through the charity, and I shared it with somebody because I said, I won't be in for the meeting Thursday afternoon, so I've got a counselling session. And they said, what's wrong? I said, nothing's wrong. I said, that's why I'm getting counselling, because I want to do this before it gets to the point where I'm flailing and thrashing around in the water. And that's not to say that we should, if you just woke up this morning and you're feeling a little bit off, banging some counselling sessions, that's not what we're saying here. But I have like a 3 in a row rule. You can have a bad day, and that's fine, because I always think of it like the weather. You just wake up with a bad mood, or something doesn't feel right in your life, or your sleep's off, your hydration, nutrition, your mood, whatever it might be. But if I've had 3 days in a row where I'm really not feeling great, something's getting progressively worse, mentally, physically, that's when I will reach out to support, usually from my family and my partner first, second from my service, my employer, and then thirdly, certainly from the charity, because you shouldn't wait until things get out of control before you reach out for it. And also, I think when it comes to that mental well-being aspect, and it's something I'd love to ask you about, Steve, because I know you've had a look into some of the PTSD stuff as well, but we had a guest on recently, Hadley Fisher. He runs an organisation that has something called the Resiliency Agenda. It was really, really cool. And I could send you some resources about it. I really enjoyed our conversation. And they term it as mental fitness. Because there is sort of if we play a word association game and I said mental health, it does have those associations of you might be weak, you're struggling, are you suicidal, is this PTSD? Don't seem to be many positives associated to it. But when we talk about fitness, and again, I know it almost has an elitism to it as well, because some people may not be able to engage in that because they think, well, fitness isn't my thing. But mental fitness is like a spectrum, and that would include, as you say there, Joss, sleep, hydration, mobility, connectivity, social environment, and all those aspects of it. What's the data saying about this, Steve?
Well, yeah, it's a good point. I like your 3 in a row, Pete. I like that. It's the ounce of prevention stuff, isn't it, with your life jacket?
100%, brother.
Yeah, for sure it is. And I know that Joss has already we talked about this before in terms of like how the Firefighters charity can help, in advance really, before things get too dire. Because, yeah, absolutely. When you look at your experience you've just shared, whether it's counselling or going to Harkham House for a physical ailment that you help with rehabilitation, there's kind of like a broad spectrum of things that the Firefighters charity can do and can help with that are, just not on the radar of on-call firefighters. I think the reason you touched on before, a part of just awareness born that could be improved from things like inductions. I think sorry, just to go back to that point, I think that it's really key. You're already part of that process within your service. And we've touched on it before in terms of recruitment and retention within the on-call, that it's really crucial, I think, for everybody in the organisation to get that foundational induction into, all manner of things that are going to affect their working life whilst they're in the fire and rescue service. Other companies that I've worked for, it's just given that you'll have a few days induction where you'll look broadly across the organisation and consider the different roles and consider the different contexts. And within the fire and rescue service, that famous quote of "we have multiple cultures that exist and this makes leadership and management challenging," those cultures involve those we've talked about already, which is Green Book, which is on call, which is whole time. And I think everybody would benefit right at the outset to have a real thorough induction that said, right, you're coming into the fire service, there's these people called on-call firefighters. As we say, they're occupying 1,000 of 1,393 fire stations across the UK. They're a predominant part of this service. And we've also got whole-time firefighters, and you may be more familiar with what they do, and they'll be in the fire stations 42 hours a week, and they'll be, providing response in major cities. And then there's these unions, and there's two of them. There's a fire brigades union and there's a fire and rescue service association, and you can choose which one to join, or both, or neither. And that's going to mediate your experience in the fire and rescue service. And then when you're in it, whether you're in admin and Green Book or whether you're on call and Grey Book, there's also this thing called the Firefighters Charity. You might have seen the yellow bins outside fire stations, and you might have seen or participated in a car wash, because they happen all the time, and they're wonderful, events to raise awareness and raise funds for the Firefighters Charity. And this is how it can help you in the future. Induction is so key, and we just, certainly in the context of the on-call, we sort of miss it, do it informally, maybe a little bit on drill nights, small conversations at the outset of somebody's career, but certainly in the main body of the organisation and sort of like headquarters and admins, that there could probably be more done really to raise awareness.
Definitely.
That doesn't really answer your question about the mental health PTSD stuff, which we're going to get onto in a minute.
I think there's a good point there that I'd probably like to expand on around the unions, and we're not going to go too far down this rabbit hole for anybody gets nervous, don't worry, but they don't seem to struggle with marketing and awareness. And I wonder if I was looking at some data recently around evolution of human beings, and it said a lot around how the pessimists have been the ones that have survived, because the optimist said, "Oh, I'm sure it's not a lion in the bush. I'm sure it's just an insect." And then they went over and, "Oh, I'm sure that rhino is not coming to stomp me." And lo and behold, many of the optimists didn't seem to make it through. The pessimists survive, and a lot of the stuff that we'll see from the unions, and they do a fantastic work and all that sort of jazz. So don't take this as a dig, but some of it can be quite salacious, and it's provocative and it's emotive, and it triggers that survival instinct in people when they're reading about things that are to do with their employment. Joss, why do you think the charity doesn't get the same level of... Because it's like the news, isn't it, as well? It's like the news. I don't watch the news. I haven't watched the news for years. And some people are like, how can you not watch the news, Peter? What if you need to know what's going on in the world? I'm like, if it's really bad, someone will tell me. But I don't want to allow all of that garbage and pessimism and negativity into my brain. I have to stand guard at the corner and the gates of my mind to not let all that in. And I much prefer to engage with content like the Firefighters Charity and stuff like that. People often ask why we don't cover some of the really big bullying harassment cases, why we don't uncover chief fire officers that are going through this, because that's not what I've got an interest in. That's not what we're about. Talk to me about the charity and its reach and its the challenges that you see in getting services on board to promote this, and why I suppose it's great that we're having this conversation, but the fact that we need to have this conversation today, and I think it's really valuable, is because we recognize people aren't getting out there. The word is not getting out there.
No, and I think some of that is again to that point that I was making before, in terms of, I think people are aware sometimes of the charity. They see the yellow boxes, they see the car washes, they're probably involved in some fundraising event somewhere. But it's that recognition that the charity is there for you that is the kind of challenging leap we need to make, and we need to support people to understand the breadth of what we offer to kind of make that leap. But also, I think sometimes when we do new recruits, we've got an amazing team of community fundraisers who are out there engaging with new recruits all over the country. But there is a sense of, well, I'm fit, I'm a firefighter, or I'm joining the service, I'm not going to need this isn't going to happen to me. That kind of principle of I'm all good, and you don't know that it's going to happen to you. Yeah, you don't know it's going to happen to you until it's right there in front of your face. So I think, some of that is, society changing in terms of our approach to well-being, our understanding about the need to look after ourselves before we fall off the waterfall, keep ourselves bobbing at the top of the river, enjoying the view. So that kind of education piece is kind of what we're engaged in. And we're not alone in this sector compared to others, and, other conversations that are happening. But also, on-call firefighters are busy people, and the amount of time that we have in terms of the amount of time that they have available to engage with us on a drill night, in terms of having a new recruit course, or us coming and giving a talk about the offer of the charity, is really compromised, and increasingly so. So I think that's why we want to encourage on-call firefighters, encourage across all of our fire family to join our MyFFC app, because that way we have a route to engagement with you in your space and place that you have available to you on your phone, not through an email that's associated with the fire and rescue service. And you can personalize your engagement with us through that app and through that route. And in that way that we can make sure that we're not bombarding you with stuff that doesn't feel appropriate to you, but stuff that really feels like it's going to help you with where you are in your career, in your life, and thinking about how we can support you at that point in time.
The team here at the podcast are extremely excited to announce our brand new partnership with Patrol Store UK. Patrol Store have been serving the UK's police, fire and emergency communities and first responder sector since 2008, providing leading brands such as Hikes, Magnum, 511, Nebo, Op Zulu, Highlander, AKU and many, many more of our favourites. They are now also supplying bespoke uniform, PPE and station workwear to fire services around the UK. So for all our listeners that are part of your USAR, your HEART team, your ISAR team, your armed response teams, your fire investigation, your NALO, your hazmat and all of the training departments that have got your own budgets, be sure to get the absolute best for your team at a realistic price by contacting Aaron and the team at Patrol Store and referencing the Firefighters podcast. Patrol Store will also be taking part in our listener competition giveaways, as well as providing unique discounts to podcast listeners. So for people that are always asking about Hikes boots as an example, that is one unique discount code that is coming to you very soon through Patrol Store. We've also got some incredible bags. I mean, the Op Zulu bags are a game changer. So the really Gucci and expensive tactical black bags that everyone's using in CrossFit workouts and taking to the gym and taking to stations? Well, they've basically got that, but it's made better and costs less, because they're not slapping some Gucci expensive brand name on it and it's giving you what you want on a first responder salary. Be sure to keep your eyes in the notes of the episodes for links to unique offers and discount codes. And if you're looking to buy well and buy once, be sure to get in the notes and head over to Patrol Store UK. Now back to the show. I think we're going one level too low there. And what I mean by that is it's a very difficult route, as you rightly highlight there, to get onto those actual on-call stations with their 1 or 2 hours a week of collective training. That's why And again, I do so many things wrong. I'm not pretending mine is the perfect template by any stretch of the imagination, but putting the onus on the service, not on the station, because you're going to get all these people together at once in their induction. And for me, I think it's halfway through or towards the end of one of the first few days where, you're going through another presentation and I'm doing a bit of a Kahoot quiz, testing them on some people that they've heard from today and all this sort of stuff. And I just bring up a QR code for the app, for the Firefighters Charity app, and say, right, next thing, scan this QR code, let me know when you've downloaded it. It's not an ask, with the greatest of respect. It's like, this is the next thing we're doing as a group.
Yeah.
And that is how I then introduce it. I'm like, right, download this, and then the next slide. And we'll talk about a little bit about the Firefighters Charity. And often I will also be supported by a member of the charity as well, if they're in the right area and they can support on the day and all this sort of jazz. I think that's the level we've got to go in at. Talk to me about the relationships you guys have with services. Again, we're not going to call out any particular services, but help people understand the setup in terms of regional leads, how you get contact with these services, overall what your visceral opinion is about how well or difficult it is to sustain like a contact point within each service, because there's a lot of services, a lot of fire services, and a lot of people changing roles now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of draws on the point that you were making earlier about the responsibility for well-being kind of lies with you as an individual, but there are support structures around you that need also to have an understanding of how to create a culture and support well-being for people in our fire family. And I think, we're really keen that we're engaging both at that fire and rescue service level. So that's an organisational level and acceptance and understanding of the need to create a language and a culture around well-being at a station level, at a watch level, at an individual level. And it's only by pulling this all together, and I hate this word, but in pulling together that kind of holistic approach to well-being that we're going to be able to kind of move that forward. And I think that's mirrored in terms of engagement and reach and awareness of the charity. We have to pull all of those threads together, that organisational level. We have to think about how we can be visible and resonate with people in the places and spaces they consume information. So this is a great opportunity for us to do that. It can't just be through one route because of how we know, the on-call community are challenged in terms of time, in terms of opportunity, and those are the things that kind of help people create behaviour change, aren't they? So that capability, that opportunity, that motivation.
Well, it's well researched in sales as well, isn't it? I always think of it as sales because I think it says on average between the 5th and 7th interaction is when you'll make a sale. So just because somebody says no or they don't engage with a thing, not that the charity's trying to sell anybody anything, but I mean just to embed that as something in their mental toolbox in terms of their own health and well-being of them and their families, to see it as a recognised route for support. You can't just do it once. Do you know what I mean? That's why it's important to have that physical presence, that logo in different places within services, have it on the induction paperwork, have it on the notice boards in fire stations, and then also have that physical presence of a rep coming to see somebody, and then also something like this, an audio for people to engage with something in a different capacity. I think we have a really bad habit of saying, oh, well, they've seen that once. I think, and Steve probably knows better than me, on average, you take on board something like 15% of a presentation that you sit through, and that drastically reduces if it goes beyond, I think, 40 minutes, just because that's the way our brains work. It's very, very difficult sort of circle to try and square.
Well, you know better than I, Pete. That's one of the reasons why podcasts are so effective as a means by which to continually communicate information. It's that oversubscribed book, isn't it? That 7-4-11 principle. It's kind of like put something out there. The podcast, perfect, because it's perpetual. It's always there. Somebody pulls it out of the ether, listen again. It's like your voice is always there, present, rather than that one-off slideshow, like you say, or that QR code or that thing on your phone. What made me think when you were talking then, Josh, was look, Firefighters are also a very practical bunch, aren't they? Really, it's the so what question all the time. It's always the like, okay, so what? So when we've captured an on-call firefighter or anybody within the organisation, and we're able to communicate with them, is a part of the puzzle succinctly showing practically what the firefighters charity can do for them. So it's not just, we're this charity and we've got these cases to look what we do. It's sort of like, boom, here we go. That's what firefighters are like.
Well, I think we learn best through stories as well, don't we, Joss? I mean, that's how the Bible was written, and I've seen a number of great case studies and examples of care and firefighters that have engaged with the charity. That is the biggest, and that, to be brutally honest, that's the model of the podcast, is it's not just me here sat reading documents or reading, procedures, or me reading a story of somebody else. It's that individual telling their story. That's how we don't, people, it's like the same again with sales. People don't buy from organizations, people buy from people. People get on board with people. I always say to people, you could hear the story of 10,000 people starving to death in Africa, but then when you hear the one story of Malala Yousafzai, and you go, wow, oh my God, that's the way news written as well. We learn through the story, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, people need to resonate. It needs to resonate for them where they are, doesn't it? That story, because if you can hear a story and you think, that actually is so far away from my reality that means that's not for me, or it's not for me, I'll fundraise them for them because I can see that's, a good charity and a good thing to do, and that's part of me being part of the fire and rescue service. But actually we need to make sure that those stories are targeted and they resonate with the people that they're going to as well. And I think there are, to the point around kind of, there are lots of stories that we could put out there about some incredibly hard challenges that people have experienced, and the charity has had the privilege to kind of support them through that. I think we also need to balance that with those stories about how somebody's flourishing, how are they thriving in this context, how are we working with them to support them to grow and build their mental well-being, their physical well-being in this space as well.
Ever heard the quote that true leaders are readers? Well, we believe this is true. Listeners often ask where we go to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sector globally. So there are a few key publications which I encourage you to go check out. Now, if you're looking for insights on disaster management, fire protection and firefighting, for us, we go to Asia Pacific Fire Magazine. And when you're looking for the latest on the Middle East fire protection industry and fire services, it's Gulf Fire Magazine. And our quarterly check-in is with International Firefighter Magazine, reporting to municipal, industrial and fire training professionals. Now, next up, and widely accepted to be the global voice for passive and active fire protection. This is a good one. It's International Fire Protection Magazine. And finally, and perhaps the most relevant to our predominantly UK audience, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to UK Fire Magazine, reporting to the United Kingdom fire protection industry and fire services. We're really excited to announce that after a long-standing relationship and mutual respect, we've now partnered with MDM Publishing, who bring you all of these essential publications. Because in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that, and I believe he was right. So keep growing, keep learning, and keep yourself in the know and at the cutting edge of what's happening globally by dropping into the notes. And as a gift from the podcast, you can actually subscribe to any of these publications for free using the link in our notes. Now back to the show. Where's the best place for people to go and see some of that? Because I've seen some of the great, and they've been filmed really nice, recorded really nicely. I think a lot of it was on the YouTube channel or through the website. You guys and girls were running a podcast for a short period of time, weren't you? Or is that still going, if I'm getting that wrong? Sorry.
So you can still access all the podcast episodes. They're all still available. Shout podcast. There are so many case studies on our website, which some of which are just a joy to kind of listen to. You know, they're videos, but there's also case studies that you can read. You can also go on to MyFFC and engage with people in real time about their experiences and and how, not just how they've engaged with the charity to receive support, but how they've identified kind of strategies and tools themselves independently and kind of supported themselves through things as well. So in that sense, that MyFFC is a facilitator, it's a connector to the kind of huge amount of resource and understanding and lived experience that exists out there in the sector as well.
I wanted to, we'll put all those notes actually. If people go underneath this, they'll see the links to all of those, because I'll get those from Joss and we'll drop them in there for the Shout podcast and for the website. Of course, that'll be in there anyway. And we want people to go and get the app, because it's one of those things that needs to be close at hand if the time when you need it. You don't want to be searching for that card on the bulletin board at home. Your phone, for better or worse, is usually on everybody at every time. For those people that don't think it will ever affect them, PTSD and aspects around that is something that really does creep up on people. There's many individuals that I've worked with who have just had this sneak up on them, and they've struggled with it for years and years. Before our conversation today, you were sharing some really interesting data that I'd love for you to just kind of unpack for us, if you could, to give some context around how the charity works with people there, what the data is saying about the sector of first responders, and certainly how on-call firefighters have dealt with these incidents as well, and also the work I think you're doing with the NFCC.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, in terms of the role, both on call and whole time and control, people are engaged and involved in incidences that will have an impact on them, traumatic instances that they experience. And I think, some of the research I was sharing before was this suggests that actually those instances, and I'm sure it will come, as no surprise to anyone listening or either of you, that suggests that actually 31% of those asked within the research identified that instances involving children impacted them on them most significantly. And I think, when they were asked to elaborate on why people found those instances most traumatic, is because of how they reflected that experience in that instant, and kind of how that may look and feel if it was within their own lives, and they may have had children of similar age themselves. And I think that's what some on-call firefighters have shared with us as well, and it kind of is especially challenging when you're attending instances in your local community, and so those places and spaces where those instances are happening are kind of resonating with you more deeply because you're walking down those streets or you're driving down those roads, and that's that kind of places it much closer to home.
That's a great point. Like Ian Dilks, one of our previous guests, he was in the military special forces for about 24 years, and now he's a firefighter as well. We were talking about PTSD, and I was kind of opening the door of interest, because we've spoken to many people from the military background who have spoken about the challenges of PTSD. But he said that he's found it far more difficult working as a firefighter, and it's exactly what you've just said there, Joss, because he said in military, he says, you go to a different country, you do some very difficult, challenging things, or you do some things that maybe challenged your moral compass, but it's environmental, and then you completely leave that environment. You leave the environment, you leave, all of the people that you're around there, you fly back to the UK, and it does allow for some compartmentation. But he says as a firefighter, and also Devine, his first name escapes me. Devine, that we had on, is a poet from the Scottish Fire and Rescue, from Ireland, sorry. He's written a number of poems about this, about when he's goes around his community and the places that he's been that all hold a story. And I thought, when I said that, I was like, so fascinating. It just echoed when you were speaking there. Like, you go to an environment, like there's a crossroads near me where I bet I've been to 11 fatalities there, one of which there was 3 fatalities in the same vehicle, a group of teenagers. And those areas, I drive them all the time. There's a place about 1.5 miles away from my home where someone hung themselves in a tree next to a river. And this was someone that was 2 years older than me, went to school and worked behind a bar that I used to go to all the time. And all of these things, you can't not think about them when you're in their environment. I went to go see Strictly Come Dancing the other night, and we went on the train. And the train station that we went to leave from, about 300 yards away from the platform itself, there's a bridge. And I went to an incident in the first 2 years of my on-call career where somebody jumped off that bridge and survived, much to their frustration. And I remember when I was with them, they were so angry that they'd survived it. They kept spitting at us, and they'd broken their legs, and they'd also... I won't go into more detail, actually. It's probably not necessary. But anyway, those environments are absolutely all around us. And having something like the charity to reach out for that level of support, because some people don't like speaking to their own service. They feel like there'll be a question around the resiliency. Are they still capable of doing the job? Will I be taken off the run? But the charity has that beauty of being completely separate and impartial. Now, of course, if someone identifies that they're going to hurt themselves or someone else around them, that's a different set of circumstances and something we have an obligation to do something about. But just help people understand that aspect, because I think that's a great deal of concern when people do reach out to support. It's the what if. What's going to happen when I make that call?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the charity works very closely with fire and rescue services. That's, a really critical route that we have to our beneficiary base. So absolutely, we work closely with them. But as an organisation, we are entirely separate from a kind of confidentiality perspective. We would never share information kind of to a fire and rescue service about your engagement with the charity. The information we share with the fire and rescue services may be aggregated numbers of people from that area who have engaged with us, and that's to support our conversation around how we work with a fire and rescue service to improve that culture of well-being, but also kind of to reflect back to them the level of need that's coming from that area, and think about how we can kind of co-create solutions to that. I think there's an interesting point around incidents, though, which I think is really important to kind of put out there, is that actually, some of the research that we commissioned with the NFCC and was delivered by Nottingham Trent University last year, said that actually, whilst large-scale incidents, big traumatic incidents that you just kind of described there, do have an impact on people's well-being, and that there is a need to kind of think about the support structures around those incidents. Often, it's the everyday life stuff and the everyday work stressors, organisational work stressors, that impact most on people's well-being. And I think it's really important.
It's that compound effect, isn't it? It's the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Exactly. And I think it's really important that, a lot of focus in the kind of general media is around, especially operational firefighters, response to traumatic instances and the potential kind of for PTSD. But actually, I think, it's important that we, from an evidence-based position, shift that dial and kind of talk about those other things that happen in people's lives. When you kind of are newly recruited into the role and you're suddenly starting to manage your work-life balance as an on-call firefighter and running your own business and being a parent to a young family, kind of how does that all work? How do you even start to put that together? That's a critical point for your well-being. Or when you're promoted within the service and you're suddenly out with that watch structure, which was your peer support network, and you're responsible for things that you hadn't been before, that's a critical point. Retirement, all of these things are critical, and I'm not trying to diminish the impact of incidents, but we also have to pay due attention to the other stuff that's happening for people.
100%, because again, otherwise, if people believe it has to be something huge in order for them to seek that support, it just becomes a barrier to people wanting to do it, because they think, well, I've not been to a plane crash or something like that. Surely this is not something with enough gravity for me to seek support. Steve, I wanted to ask you around retention, because one of the things that I've heard and seen and has a general feeling for, and I wonder if you could help me connect the dots, is this aspect of well-being. We speak about it a lot. We write it on walls, we put it on documents, and sometimes I think it's treated a little bit like a punchline, and we don't fully understand the impact of retention in terms of not giving it due sort of due time and due consideration. And I know, I think before we came on today, you were talking about some research, I think it was from Australia, in and around this being a key aspect for retention, because it costs a lot to train firefighters, and we don't want them being in for 4, 5, 6, 7 years and then realizing they're not very well looked after and us having to repeat the cycle again.
Yeah, and as we've talked about before, Pete, that we're amidst a bit of a retention crisis, and that's clearly evidenced by the ONS data. We've lost 25% of on-call firefighters in the last decade, really. Nearly 3,000 across the country, on average about 6 per service per year. And one of the good ways to frame it in terms of our conversation today, and looking at some research, which was actually from Bustle and Forbes in 2006, which looked at like using a paradigm that we're familiar with operationally, Pete, a risk-benefit analysis, but use that paradigm in an organisational context for volunteers and volunteer firefighters to say what are the benefits of doing the job and what are the risks. And that takes us down, it links us nicely into what Joss has just eloquently been talking about, really, and this idea of the effect of not necessarily PTSD, but post-incident on the family life of an on-call firefighter. So in that on-call context, you've got all of those factors conflated, haven't you? You're coming back from an incident and immediately you're going to be within 5-10 minutes, you're going to be back at home with your family. If you're a whole-time firefighter, you might go back with that support network just talked about within your watch, with the familiarity, and you've got time to decompress, to talk, to however you might do it, a close, intimate chat with a colleague, go to the gym to work out, to get some frustration out, process. But on-call firefighters invariably don't get that time. They're just post-incident, straight back into a family context. That can really affect their ability to be present with the family in that moment. They're preoccupied by what's just gone. And that represents a risk, because in the context of retention, that research showed that a big risk factor is the impact on family, the burden that the role has on those people around the on-call firefighter, and the extent to which over time it erodes their not desire to support the on-call firefighter, but their just capacity to do it, because that person's coming back preoccupied and they're being torn away from special moments with their family, or where they're needed. And that's one of the big risks, really, and big factors in retention. And how do we, there's no silver bullet for that either. There's no, that is just the nature of the job. You're going out, short notice, the alerter goes off, you're there 10 minutes later, as you well know, Pete, at something, a challenging situation. Not always, but sometimes. And then 10 minutes later, you can be back at home with the family. And how do you, ameliorate that? How do you just lessen the impact when you come back to the family? And that's where I think the Firefighters Charity and those just the empathy, the support, the idea. We've talked about this FIRES acronym before, Pete, this idea that we really need to be in an on-call context more than ever before, recognising and empathising with the plight of an on-call firefighter and then supporting them. And that support, that S in that FIRES acronym, is where the Firefighters Charity, for me, comes in and can play a key role.
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drillbook. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading onto Drillbook, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, notes and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show. So, Joss, if you could expand on that for us, because again, we spoke about operational, non-operational staff, but I feel like I'd love us to go a little bit more deeper into people's family, people's dependents, and how we can expand on that. Because as Steve rightly says there, you know, you're getting straight back home and your husband or your wife is now running late for work because they've had to sort their kids out because you've been on a fire call since 4 a.m. And then eventually that's not sustainable. People get to the point where their husband, wife, significant other is saying this isn't manageable. It's affecting my mental health. It's affecting my sleep because you keep going off on your jolly with all your friends on the fire truck. And there are mechanisms to be able to support both those individuals and even the children, you know, for people whose children have got a real learning difficulty or, you know, need to take a break as a family or something like that. Give us a little bit of understanding around how the charity supports on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important, though, also to kind of bring into this conversation around the pride that families also talk about. So, yes, they are impacted by their partner's connection or role within the fire and rescue service, but they also have an enormous sense of, and express to us regularly, this enormous sense of pride of the role that their on-call firefighter in their family plays in their community, and that kind of currency.
I get my missus to put it on the side of her car just to let everybody know.
Yeah, no, I think Steve, you said to me,
you're right.
Steve, you said to me before, like the currency that gives you in terms of mitigating some of that downside of it shouldn't kind of be underplayed. But I think, you know, it is we can't also dismiss the sacrifices that families kind of share and talk to us about that they make in order to support the kind of on-call firefighter role. And I think people, you know, I've heard people say about kind of feeling isolated and lonely and feeling like they're kind of picking up some of these challenges themselves in terms of child's routine, etc. And I think, you know, even from my experience, I know I regularly play top trumps with my husband around whose meeting's more important or whatever that may be. And I think, you know, that must be like dialed up like 100 times when you're talking about the on-call firefighter role and, you know, the pager that goes off.
Because it's the unpredictability of it as well. Yeah. That's the aspect, yeah. I always used to say it was a bit like supervised visitation. Not that I've ever had to do it, but if I'd have committed a crime, I can't be alone with my children when they were very young because I might have to go. So, you know, my wife or, you know, my parents, if I'm around there or something like that, they have to commit to being there all the time for that period that I'm on call, all for nothing. Perhaps on most of the occasions, nothing might happen. I might go nowhere and they feel like they've missed an opportunity, wasted their time, didn't see their friend, couldn't go to cinemas, shopping, out for a drink, whatever it might be, meet up for coffee, because we had to be here in case mummy or daddy got a fire call. That's a huge, huge load that gets added onto that person's life circumstance.
Yeah.
As Josh said, I think that what can mitigate that is just sometimes one significant incident in the local community that you've attended, that your family knows about through word of mouth within that local community. They talk about it and they talk about it with a sense of pride that gets that sort of like family token, you know, to support mummy or daddy for that next year ahead while they, as you say, they're having that visitation time with their family and they're thinking, oh, is he going to go? It's really, really an important part. And it's changed, and certainly this has impacted on retention in terms of activity levels. So not only the dynamic of which incidents are being attended by on-call crews and on crews across the country, whether they're on-call the whole time, the reduction in activity levels means that sometimes there's less opportunity to be doing those incidents and to be part of those incidents that are, you know, quote unquote meaningful. You know, we don't want to get to those, but they're an important part of why everybody's signing up to do the job, to really make a difference at that incident. And when there's less of those incidents and less opportunities to do it, over time, it reduces retention and reduces the amount of tokens that on-call firefighter gets with their family.
Absolutely.
It really does.
Yeah. But I
I
think there
interrupted
are
you, Josh. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think there are strategies and there are things that people are putting in place to kind of protect themselves and their family all over the country all the time. And I think what connecting with each other and kind of through the charity, through MyFFC, what enables people to do is to kind of share that stuff, share the stuff that's working for them. You know, whether it's you're going out to a meal, you're taking two cars, you're thinking about kind of reducing some of that perceived risk that children may worry about where mummy or daddy is going through reading our Wolf book, which is available kind of
I
on our
love that
website.
book.
It's
That was
incredible, isn't
really,
it?
really good.
Yeah. And
Yeah, the howling in the night and the fear of it, and what does it mean? And is daddy going to come back, or is mummy going to be okay? It's a really good book.
yeah,
We got it.
my children love it as well, but just to kind of peer into what that means as well, I think for firefighters, and I think it's expressed in a really lovely way that reduces any anxiety around that kind of perceived risk that people may have. So I think there's stuff that people can do about kind of reducing their sense of isolation. They're not in this alone, normalizing some of that potentially kind of negative stuff they may feel towards the pager or the role. You know, somebody was explaining about the challenges that they had in terms of people hiding, family members hiding the pager around the house because they couldn't bear to have it in the room with them any longer because it just represented all of this stuff. So there's those kinds of
Yes,
things that
yeah.
people are experiencing, and it's okay. It's okay that you feel like that. What we need to do is kind of work with you to mitigate and reduce how that's impacting on you and your functioning so that doesn't become in a difficult kind of to a difficult level.
A lot of what we've been talking about here today, and this is something that we've never had a complaint to the podcast by any stretch of the imagination, but I do feel frustration sometimes when I listen to other podcasts, and it's a bit like you put someone in a warm bath, they get it, they're on board with it, you've articulated it well, but it's like, as Steve said earlier, now what? Like, what's the deployable tools? And I wanted us to kind of go into that space a little bit, Josh, if you could, and help us. Because firefighters are very practically minded people, and so is the wider fire and rescue service family. Like, what can we use? What could I pick up, go to, download, use today for something that I am struggling with? So talk to me about deployable tools that the charity has and supports with.
Yeah, I think kind of that real practical, tangible stuff is so important. And I think accessibility, as we've already talked about, is equally important. So, you know, as an organisation, as a charity, we are all over the country providing workshops through our kind of wellness and behaviour change coaches, who I know you've spoken to, AJ, kind of one of my team who's out there delivering and providing wellbeing information, tools and strategies across fire and rescue services on everything from sleep to nutrition to identifying your personal strengths and menopause and kind of so many more things in between. But equally, you know, as we've already said, that requires people to kind of have some space and create some space to kind of engage with that at a certain time. So there are also tools which are accessible through MyFFC or our website, which are much more self-directed. So you can engage and consume those when you've got a spare 5 minutes or something kind of makes you think about, you've had a rubbish night's sleep and the kids have come scrambling in and you need some support as to kind of how you improve your sleep hygiene, how you improve your sleep quality. There are tools on our website. There are courses that you can take which support you to understand and unpack that from where you are and where you sit. And I think you know, some of those tools and the resources sit as that kind of first layer of how you create change in yourself. So how do you identify that opportunity to make the change in the thing that feels really hard for you at the moment? And you know, another part of that puzzle, the thing that helps make the change, is the kind of capability. Have you got the knowledge and the skills around that area to help you make the change? Well, that's where the charities can come in. We do have some of this knowledge, and we can draw on that gives you that opportunity to identify the things that are going to work for you. And I think it's about, I think when you're feeling depleted, when your well-being is being impacted, when you're empty, your cup is empty, you can't choose your response to stress. There's from trigger to reaction, there's no space in between. So having a little bit of knowledge, having a strategy or a tool helps you create that beat between trigger and response, that breath, that moment, that chance to choose how you respond to that stress. And I think that some of these tools and these things may not feel immediately useful at that point in time, but if you have that understanding, that knowledge, that opportunity, then you can draw on that when that particular trigger impacts on you. And I think that's what, as a charity, we're able to kind of provide, and those things are easily accessible on your mobile phone.
I think people underestimate how useful that stuff is, because I've read also some interesting studies about how people respond in crises. We actually had someone on recently who was a specialist in crowd safety and human behaviour as well in times of crisis, and they'd done some research that had come from the Manchester bombings and from Grenfell. Fascinating episode. The woman is so knowledgeable on this. But they demonstrated within that conversation, and it's same here, when you're going through a crisis, whether that's a life crisis, whether it's a physical thing, what you think you would do and what you actually do, and the simple things that you forget to do when you have that initial trigger and your immediate response to it, can set you off on a path where you're sliding down the proverbial mud hill heading for the river. And having some of these useful tools, having some of these mechanisms quick to hand, gives you an opportunity to dig your heels into the hill and stop the slide. Do you know what I mean? That's what I think of the charity as at times, is a helping hand. It's a branch, it's a foothold for me to stop that slide, get some perspective, and also get some tools, some resources and some strategies to be able to slowly begin that climb back into a little bit more mental, physical stability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that in that space, in that kind of response, that kind of trigger response space, we don't see strength in that space as the kind of difference between reacting and not reacting. The strength for me comes in the bit before, that you've recognized that and you've taken the opportunity to rest or to look after your well-being. That's where the strength lies. And we work better when we are rested, when we do understand and we do have those kind of tools and strategies. And I think that we need to kind of reframe that conversation. We're not kind of suggesting that you're always going to kind of respond in that way, but you're giving yourself the best opportunity to respond differently. Yeah. And when you can't and when you don't, then the charity's here as well. So it's kind of, we're here to kind of help you at the bottom of that waterfall, but also increasingly to think about how we give you that strength, that opportunity to rest, that information, knowledge, skills and tools to be able to kind of choose a different route.
Absolutely love it. I think we've gone in so many fantastic rabbit holes there. There's almost like a buffet of resource, knowledge, data, evidence, which we've covered in our conversation today. I want to be respectful of your time because I know people won't know we're recording this on a Saturday morning. You, Joss, are much more of an interesting social butterfly, so I know you have commitments today. Me and Steve are both sad. We just need to go and do our own sad stuff. No, I'm joking. I know Steve's got family commitments as well. The constant challenge of the on-call firefighter. But so we will put all the references. They've got some case study links that we've spoken about today that people can find in the notes. You will see a link in there to the charity app. You'll find a link there to their website. And I would strongly encourage You know what? Even if not for yourself, share this. Send it to someone that you know has just joined your service. Speak about it on your on-call induction night. Talk about it on parade. Put the QR code up on the notice board. For people that feel like they are super busy, I haven't got time to read the document, I'm not going to go to the website, they could put this conversation on in the car. Because I'd rather people have it and not need it than need it and not be aware of it. I think that's the biggest aspect that I think we can take away from today's conversation as well. Well, look, thank you so much for your time, both of you. Please send my love to the rest of the family, and I really look forward to doing some more work with the charity in the future.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you for your time, Pete.
The Firefighters podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you are in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.